Today with me is Andreas Perotti, a true defense tech expert.
We got to remind ourselves where we came from. Looking back at the time pre-2022, when the invasion in Ukraine happened, we were in an environment where there was zero startup community in the defense area. The whole image was shaped by Hollywood movies like Lord of War. You're making money with killing people. What is totally not the case in the defense industry. It's one of the most ethical industries I'm aware of, with a lot of people extremely purpose-driven. Today, we have an environment which is totally changed. The companies which were almost bankrupt are the best performing stocks on the market today. Armies are increasing their capabilities at a scale unseen before. And this whole traction in this industry, especially also with the technological impact arriving now, is unseen. It seems like a symbiosis of the moon landing, Wild West and Gold Rush at the same time, and also everybody who criticized that industry before wants to enter it now because they see the money, but the truth is it's not that easy.
Let's talk about tech. Let's talk about tech. Let's talk about tech.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Tech, your startup show on venture capital and private equity, brought to you by Venionaire Capital. Today with me is Andreas Perotti, a true defense tech expert and also the group director of future innovation business in defense at Frequentis. I hope I said that correctly. Andreas, it's great to have you here in the studio with us. Tell us a bit about about your story. Have you been a soldier and then decided I don't want to be in service anymore and went into defense tech straight away, or was it more of an interesting journey to land where you are today?
Well, I think it's neither of both. In our community in the defense industry, you've got two types of people. You have the guys coming from the civil side, and you have the former military guys, mostly officers, afterwards swapping into the private sector. And I think I'm kind of a hybrid, because I did a 1-year volunteering service in the Austrian Armed Forces. I did officer exercises and training, and I'm still active reserve soldier with my basic training as a weapon category, or from a weapon category perspective, as armored infantry. But right now transitioning to other functions, focusing more on drones and future defense tech topics. At the same time, I made my first contact with the environment of defense, war and the impact of war in one of my first jobs when I was serving for almost 1.5 years in Kosovo and in Israel. But that was in the framework of the European neighborhood policy. So I wasn't there as a soldier, but I was there more or less as a civil servant. But I grew up in an environment where you get in touch with the impact of that topics. And that, of course, shapes you. And you don't forget the experience which you made there. Afterwards, I entered the public sector, where I was working in the European Parliament for 3 years, and afterwards 2 years in the Austrian government. And this time actually shaped a kind of European patriotism, which I still carry until today. And I think especially in times like these, being aware of that feeling that the European integration matters is more important than ever, Afterwards, so meaning after 6 years, when I left the public sector, I joined the telecommunications industry, where I got in touch with networks, connectivity, the first topics of cybersecurity, which is pretty important looking at the defense industry today, and even more important looking into the future. Topics like Battlefield of Things, but I guess we talk more about that later on. And then I joined the aerospace security and defense industry, where I was 8 years in one of the main supply chain companies of Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, and others. And where actually I built up the whole topic of eVTOLs, big autonomous drones for passenger transport and civil use cases, drone logistics, and I fell in love with the topic of drones. As well as space on top, also one of the areas we touched based in, and both is equally important also for DevTech. And after that sector, I landed where I am today, serving in an amazing company as group director of future defense business, meaning my job is to deal the whole day with stuff that impacts us tomorrow in the defense environment. And on top of that, I have my own defense tech startup where I'm co-founder, where we specialize on AI for GNSS denied navigation software. So I'm none of the two groups which you mentioned initially. I'm a kind of a hybrid. But that's also one of the assets I think I bring to the topic.
Great. From education standpoint, from your background, are you more on the technical side or economics, legal?
Well, my education was life and the jobs which I did, but I also studied, yeah, and I have my master, which is in law and political science. But to be honest, I never envisioned to go in that direction. But since it's more or less a demand, or it was a demand back then when I studied, you needed to do that if you want to enter certain professional directions. But I started working more than full time in my early 20s or in the late teenagers, however you want to put it, meaning I was in the job circle already during university, and thus it became less important for me. And I have to say though, if I regret something in my life so far, putting a bit more emphasis on an interesting study environment would be something I would change if I do it again.
Well, who knows? Maybe it's not even in your advantage. I think it's quite inspiring always to hear stories when people have, have decided early to go into one direction and
Yes.
study.
Yes.
And I mean, we all know that, right? When we're young, we're thinking terribly, should I study, I don't know, medicine? Should I go into legal? Should I go into economics, or maybe mathematics, physics, or, chemistry, whatever it is. And none of us has a glass ball. We never know where we end up, right? And I followed your career quite a bit. I mean, we're friends for many, many years.
Right.
And I've seen you've entered at a quite high level, always working for extremely inspiring and impactful people. And I wondered how you make those transitions, and how you can carry with your core knowledge right forward to those different industry segments. And I wonder how this picture, this mosaic picture, kind of plays in together what you're doing today. So when you tell us a bit more of what you're doing today and
Right.
what's your today's business, tell us a bit in which elements from the past kind of play into this, and why this works particularly great for you.
Well, that's a very good question. And if you would have asked me 20 years ago if I would have envisioned where I am today, I would have told you, or I would have given you a totally different answer. So there was a very smart guy once who said you can't connect the dots in the future, only in the past. And there were always these decisive moments what led me to my next chapter. And at the end of the day, I think it's not so much about hard skills which you have, but about some capabilities, like to fall in love with topics, to develop passion and energy, to do what you really like, because then you do it good. If you don't like it anymore, you need to change it, and also have some kind of bite and grip into topics. Dig into something, even if you have no idea how to use the shovel, but learn how to use it, and then be consistent and dig into that. And over the time, you build up expertise, you build up credibility. But yeah, I'm a kind of human form of big data fusion. Let's put it like this, because a lot of stuff and things I did, where you're right, are not interconnected on the first page, but very interconnected on the second page. And looking today at defense, you need experience from the public sector. You need to think internationally, have political know-how, networking, connectivity, communications, data transmissions play a decisive role. Well, no need to talk more about drones. Everybody knows that. That's obvious. They are one of the big game changer topics, but by far not the only one. This is where everything comes together. Yeah. And I think that's important to look at a lot of developments from different angles. And what I have to say is, looking at the defense industry as of today, I think the impact of civil technologies, which were not originally developed for defense, is extremely high. And therefore, this whole civil-military interaction is getting ever increasingly more important.
I think this blend is particularly interesting because, I mean, when you mention drones, everybody thinks of their beautiful little DJIs or whatever system you have that you use to, I don't know, make videos, right? When you're mountain biking or filming your kids, etc. And then there is drones in the field, right? And also in surveillance and many other use cases. Now, some of those drones are operated from the ground. Some of those drones are autonomous. Obviously, airspace is a controlled space and highly regulated. There is many aspects that I think are not 100% clear to everyone out there. Can you explain a bit the complexity, what's involved when you say drones, right? Because drones is just one topic, but huge amount of, I would say, volume under the surface, like an iceberg, right?
Well, to be honest, hardly anything is clear, not just in drones, but also in drones. Because we got to remind ourselves where we came from. I mean, looking back at the time pre-2022, when the invasion in Ukraine happened, we were in an environment where there was zero startup community in the defense area. It was a topic where you were one of the bad guys when you worked in. The whole image was shaped by Hollywood movies like Lord of War. You're making money with killing people. What is totally not the case in the defense industry. It's one of the most ethical industries I'm aware of, with a lot of people, extremely purpose-driven. And I always say, if you want to make money, don't go to defense. It's much easier in other areas. And on top of that, even big primes were struggling with not going bankrupt. And people in uniform were not argued with their core domain of defending their countries and protecting people, but with shoveling snow in case of a hard winter, And today, read the news. We have an environment which is totally changed. The companies which were almost bankrupt are the best performing stocks on the market today. Armies are increasing their capabilities at a scale unseen before. And this whole traction in this industry, especially also with the technological impact arriving now, this whole traction is unseen. For me, it seems like a symbiosis of the moon landing, Wild West, and Gold Rush at the same time, And also everybody who criticized that industry before wants to enter it now because they see the money. But the truth is, it's not that easy. Yeah? And at the end of the day, it's not about the balance sheet at first place. Because if we fail in the mission here, which we have as a civil military defense industry complex, our balance sheets won't matter anymore. And that's what it's all about.
It's very interesting you say that. I tend to remind people that some of the greatest disruptive innovations of our time that we like to use every day, and we're streaming even today, right, through the internet. Internet is one of those examples, originated in the defense industry and then became a public game changer. The geolocation system, GPS, right? And so on and so on, even augmented reality, right? So all of this had basically the origins in the defense industry, and then did some really good change in the overall economy. Now, you said that in the blend now, civil technologies have a blend and come into defense. Do you also see that defense funding and a more professionalized investment scheme, global collaboration among allies is driving disruptive change again? Will there be something good when we're safer again?
That's a good point. I mean, what I do not see is an increase of global collaboration. I see the opposite. I see a local for local approach, which actually was initiated in times of COVID on an economical global scale when it came to supply chains or medicine products and pharmacy and stuff like that. And today in defense, after Ukraine war started and looking at all the geopolitical tensions, I see the opposite, that we are kind of decoupling the markets. We try to get a much higher resilience in the supply chain. and that touches every aspect. I mean, look at the recent procurement of the Austrian army, for example. Since we are in that country right now, and the guys do a great job. They even were worrying about Microsoft Office, and they installed LibreOffice. What has nothing to do in principle with defense capabilities, but it's the whole ecosystem around that. So I see more decoupling than of increased collaboration, which makes the defense tech community quite interesting in Europe, because in every other area you have global competition, or you had global competition. And I mean, the United States and competitors from Asia, for us Europeans, gave us a pretty hard time. Yeah? Whereas in defense, you have this advantage that you're also competing, but on a much less global scale, to put it like that. Yeah? However, there are other struggles you have to struggle with, thinking about long procurement cycles and all that stuff. But there is so much change going on. When it comes to the innovation part, which you mentioned, I think this old rule of war innovations, defense innovations spilling over to commercial markets and the civil industry, it's still valid when it comes to core technologies. I always say the first ones to build in a fusion reactor into something is going to be the armed forces into a submarine, for example. However, I have to say, in the digital space, I have the feeling right now it's the opposite. Meaning the civil industry, the civil sector, was so much front running in the last 10 years that these innovations and inventions and technologies right now spill over with a delay into the defense markets. Yeah? And Ukraine is the best example for that. I mean, how did the war of drones come? At the end of the day, it was out of a necessity because they had no other choice, And it's quite funny to see that there is a technology which is 15 or even more years on the market. I mean, consumer drones are not a new invention. The market penetration is quite high, with very high market share of DJI, at least in the past. And it took a war to understand the impact of such technology. That's quite bad, to be honest, because it also shows we didn't think ahead too much, and there are still some principles of that which I see today. We think too little ahead.
How about detecting those little drones? I mean, Frequentis is a I know it's your corporate job, right? But it's a world market leader, if I'm not mistaken, in systems that manage airspace, right? Air travel. Now, such a little tiny drone, does it even show up on the radar? How can you capture that? Or is this a completely new technology that is needed?
No, that's a very good point, and the whole world is struggling right now how to solve that. It depends. I think that's the answer. You can detect drones depending on size and so on, even with classical radars. You can't detect a swarm, for example, with classical radars. It would show up as one dot in the radar picture. So you don't know, is it 50 drones? Is it 500? Is it 5,000? If you only use this one sensor or this one classical sensor technology. And just very close before impact, when the swarm splits up into 5 smaller swarms attacking you from different angles, you might see that. However, these technologies exist, but they weren't used in such a way I described right now. Yeah, but they will be. I mean, we have all these technologies for huge AI commanded drone swarms, being even the next game-changing evolution of the drone warfare, but we don't see that as of today. Today, there are no real autonomous systems in the market, even though everybody talks about that. It's autonomy assisted, like human piloted, and the last mile is an AI targeting system, for example. But overall, you can say what we consider as autonomous is mostly remotely piloted. And demands also for one pilot. Yeah? But that's going to change quite fast, and especially in such a fast-changing domain. Speaking about the countermeasure, because that's also an interesting part. Looking at the last 3-4 years of warfare in the East. This scale of innovation measure, counter innovation measure, that's huge at the speed hardly seen. And today, one of the biggest challenges for us in Europe and globally is, how do we protect from that? How can you do that? Nobody has an experience here besides maybe the Israelis and the Ukrainians, and even there, things are moving fast. So, give you an example. Everybody's talking about jamming and spoofing technologies to set countermeasures against drones. But what if drones don't send a signal anymore because they have onboard edge AI? And that's not some sci-fi future stuff out of reach. That's happening right now. So we are in danger to invest a lot of money into something what's not going to protect us tomorrow.
So what you're saying is the innovation cycles are so fast that any counter reaction you're doing today, you're potentially doing on something that is already outdated because the next thing is in the pipeline.
That could happen, and that's one of the main reasons why a lot of MODs are reserved from stockpiling 100,000 or more FPV drones in their arsenals, because, and that's fully understandable, they say, why should I do that if they're outdated in 6 months? And this is why we need a totally new approach in defense. We need a software-defined approach like we have in the civil industry. That doesn't work everywhere, but in the area of drones, it can work. Meaning, I always like to bring this example of a Tesla, because everybody can relate to that, even though it's a polarizing topic today, this brand. However, you bought the hardware 4 years ago, and through software updates, you have still the same hardware today, but the functionalities, the features are not just optimized, but in some areas totally changed. And that's an approach we need to implement in a lot of different areas in the defense industry as well, because then we can keep up with the pace.
Also, my Mercedes has better battery, how do you say, performance after the software updates.
Right.
It's not only Tesla. Just to make a little point on our local industry here.
I don't drive a Tesla. I also drive a Mercedes.
It's okay.
And try to buy European these days.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we also have to make sure that people remain in their jobs, right? As this is all shaken up.
Right.
Now, you said that there is more concentration on and localization happening, right? And you just said, as I do, right? We are buying more local, right? But when we look into drones or any other technology, the chips come from somewhere, the battery come from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
We have interconnected supply chains. Are we actually able, or is anybody in the world able to build everything by themselves? Like, does anyone in the world have a full supply chain under their own control, or is this a fantasy? Because to me, it sounds like a political joke a bit.
This is a very interesting point you're getting to, and I think you're on the right track here. Yeah? Because it's always the question when you stop looking what's behind. What do I mean here? We always speak about the global supply chain dependency from Taiwan when it comes to chips, for example. But if you look at the supply chain of the chips themselves, it's also globalized. I mean, we have the machinery for the shop floors from Europe. You have
the boards, these green boards.
Right.
AT&S is one of the biggest suppliers in the world from Austria.
Is it really possible in modern technologies to be 100% resilient? Honestly, I don't know. Yeah, it really depends on the topic. I think we can acknowledge that a lot of countries try to do that. If some will achieve it, I don't know. Yeah. At the end of the day, I'm not a big fan of deglobalization. I don't think it's good for the world. It's not bringing more wealth, and it's decreasing security massively. But it's a matter of fact. It's happening. And even though I would have loved if our world continues the path from 10 years ago, like global harmony and trade and peace and collaboration and working together, it's a matter of fact that we take a U-turn. We took a U-turn for various reasons. And as Europeans, we gotta get prepared for that, because at the end of the day, you don't have friends or foes, you only have interests. And if these interests don't match, it might get dangerous.
Mm. I mean, in Davos, this was basically on every podium,
Yep.
right? This year, 2026 in Davos at the World Economic Forum. What got me thinking was a bit of a note that I had last year at World Venture Forum, which is dear to our heart as we are founding partners of the foundation.
Right.
Here we said innovation in a global collaboration is much more powerful, much more effective than anything else because nobody has all resources at hand locally. And there's a second component to that. If people have something to lose, so if you're in a globalized environment, you have entrepreneurship as effectively the most efficient peace project you can have. Because when people have something to lose, they're more unlikely to shoot at each other, right? And I still hope, right, that entrepreneurship succeeds over the political force of gaining more power locally.
Yeah.
That's at least my hope.
That's a very nice hope. And I think we shouldn't burn down the bridges, even though we are sometimes these days not so sure if we can walk through that bridges. But I fully agree here. Yeah. And at the end of the day, game-changing technology, which is increasing the lives of people. And that's not in the defense now, even though that's our topic. Shouldn't have national flags. Should serve mankind. And I fully agree here. Yeah.
It's a good closing word. You know, innovation should have the purpose to make the world a better place. We want to live in a more resilient place. And we also want you guys to live longer and prosperous. It was great to have you here, Andreas. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate that. Tune in for the next episode. Thank you for
Let's talk
watching.
about tech.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about tech. Let's talk about tech, baby. Let's talk about your IP. Let's talk about steel, baby. Let's talk about